of this. If one covers a sukkah with iron spits or with a long bedboards, if the space between them is as wide as they, the sukkah is valid. If one hollows out a haystack to make a sukkah for himself, it is not considered a sukkah. If one hung walls from the top downward, if the height from the ground is three tefachim, it is invalid. From the bottom upwards, if they extend to the height of 10 tefachim, it is valid. If Yossi stays just as the bottom upwards 10 tefachim high from the top downward 10 tefachim, if one removed the sukkah covering three handbreadths away from the walls, it is invalid. If a house diminished and one covered over it, if there are 4 cubits between the walls and the sukkah, it is invalid. And the same applies to a yard surrounded by an exedra, a large sukkah which is surrounded by an unfit sukkah covering. If there are beneath it 4 amas, it is invalid. Okay.
Okay. Also, sukkah so min sarif. Okay, if he makes his sukkah like a hut, which is the Kahati helpfully draws an upside down V to
Right.
okay, so basically you take a bunch of sticks and you strap them together and you balance them together to make that little V. Or shesam chalakosel, or similarly you just had a wall and you placed all the sticks at an angle across it so you could crawl underneath it and have shelter from the sticks. Rabbi Eliezer posel mipnei she'en lagag. He says this is not valid. It doesn't have a distinct roof. Chachamim machshirin. Chacham say it's true. It's actually kosher. There's actually an opinion that the is it in the Gemara that the Gemara brings a baraisa that the days are switched. That Chachamim say that it's possible, and Rabbi Eliezer is the one who's machshir. But at any rate, the halacha is that it is not kosher. It needs to have a distinct roof that's separate from its walls.
Right. You can
Okay.
see all these things when you go to that park. I forget what it's called, but the
Yeah,
park.
yeah. I remember it. I know the one you're talking about, but I can't remember what its name is. Yes. Um, okay. Machatzeles kanim gedola. What happens if you have a big reed mat? Okay. Now, asa al shchiva mekabeles tuma ve'ein mesakhin ba lesikoch mesakhin ba ve'ein mekabeles tuma. So it depends. So the large reed mat, according to the Tanakama, says we have to know what your das was when you made the mat. Was it made for sitting on? If it was made for sitting on, then immediately it's mekabel tuma because that's a mat. It's mekabel. It was mekabel midras tuma even. Okay, so that would not be valid for schach. However, if it was made lechatchila, like our schach is made in these rolls and things today, that's a big reed mat, and it's certainly kosher for schach because it's made for schach. Um, okay, now Rabbi Eliezer disagrees. He says, achas katan v'achas gedola. He says, I don't care whether it's big or small, because the Tanakama assumed that if it's small, then it's made for yeah, the small one is mistama is made for sitting on because it's not going to give you much shade, but you don't
Right.
have that much space to sit on, right? Okay, so he says I don't care whether it's big or small. Asa l'shchiva mekabeles tuma ve'en mesachin ba l'sikuch mesachin ba ve'en mekabeles tuma. It all depends on the das, and I think the Tanakama held that the stam the machlokes is really about what's the stam das of making a small mat or a big mat. Um, and whatever the case is, the principle is true. It's just a diversion of digression as to what's your stam das when you make a reed mat. Okay. Hayashem tachas hamita. What happens if somebody sleeps under a bed in the sukkah? Lo yatzai yedei chovaso. He has not fulfilled his obligation because being if the bed is 10 tefachim high, which I guess beds, I suppose it depends on what kind of bed you've got. But if the bed is 10 tefachim high, then it's a separate shelter within the shelter, and
Yeah.
therefore it interposes and he's not actually inside the sukkah. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, נוהגים היינו שהיינו ישנים תחת המיטה בפני זקנינו ולא אמרו לנו דבר. He said, but that's exactly what we always used to do.
Right. Right.
Nobody ever said a word to us. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's mutar to sleep in the bed under the bed, because he's going according to his shita that a sukkah is something that's made with derech keva. Remember, he's also the guy who said that a sukkah that's bigger than 20 amas is also is kosher. So he says a sukkah can be a derech keva, and since the bed is a temporary structure, it doesn't count.
Mm.
Okay, sure, right? Because you pick it up and move it from place to place inside the sukkah. It's not called a permanent. That's not called a permanent thing, and therefore he holds that it would be fine to sleep under the bed. Amar Rabbi Shimon Maaseh. Is a come on. We've got this famous story from Rabban Gamliel. Okay, why? But Tavi Avdash of Rabban Gamliel, and his famous servant Tavi, who was an Eved Kanani. Okay. But a Talmid Chacham. Shahaya Yashin Tachas Amita. Tavi used to sleep under the bed. But Amar Lehen Rabban Gamliel Lezakanim. And Rabban Gamliel commented to his rabbinic guests, Re'isim Tavi Avdi. Look at my brilliant servant Tavi. Shehu Talmid Chacham v'yodea she'avadim paturim min sukkah. He's a Talmid Chacham. He knows that an Eved, like a woman, is pater from sukkah because it's a mitzvah aseh shezman grama. Okay. Lefichach yashin hu tachas hamita. Therefore, in this sukkah where all the chachamim are gathered and there's a run on space, nobody like you can't get enough people in. And Tavi says, you know what? I'll take the spot under the bed. Chacham. He doesn't need to be in the sukkah, but he can come and listen to the chachamim. So he sits under the bed. ולפי דרכנו למדנו שהישן תחת המיטה לא יצא ידי חובתו. And as we see from Rabban Gamliel's words, it's pretty clear that the psak is that somebody who's under the bed is not yotzei with the sukkah. And kach halacha, I believe. Okay.
Good.
Base. Hasomech sukkah so bekare hamita. Okay, now he's got a sukkah that's very wobbly. So he takes so he props up the bed. He props it up with the bed.
Mhm.
Okay, sure, that's fine, no problem, as long as the sukkah stays erect. Yeah, it doesn't matter that it's being held up by the bedposts. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Im Eina Yechola La'amod Bifnei Atzma Psula. So here's Rabbi Yehuda again, is saying that the sukkah's got to be a diras keva. It's got to be something that'll stand properly, not that it's going to be held up by a bedpost. He doesn't like this. Okay, but again, halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda. Sukkah hameduvleles, which they said in the commentary here that meduvleles is kind of a synonym for mevulveles, that it's all in disarray. That the schach is thick here, thin there, and it's not well organized. Shetzilasa meruba mechamasa, but at least its shade is more than its sun, even though it's shady in parts and sunny in parts, but nonetheless overall there's more shade than sun in the sukkah. Nonetheless, that is a kosher sukkah. Ideally, you want to have your schach spread out evenly and giving a nice shade everywhere, even if there's a little bit of sun peeking through the branches. But this we're talking about where it's like thick here and thin there, and that
Right.
nonetheless is kosher. Hamauba kamin bias. What happens if the schach is so thick that it's like the roof of a house? So you've taken a whole bunch of logs and piled them on high, so that it's a thick ceiling of logs. Af al pi she'ena kochavim nirim mitocha shera. Even though you cannot see the stars from within it, it is kosher. Yeah, no. Uh,
Well,
so here from here we do learn nonetheless that lechatchila you should be able to see the stars through it.
right.
Okay,
Right.
but it's not a psul. If you cannot see the stars through it, that doesn't invalidate the sukkah, but it's just not lechatchila. It shouldn't be such a heavy covering that you can't see the stars. All
There's a,
right.
there's a, there's a comment about commentary about whether the sukkahs were on a cover or they're little huts or that it was there's a description about that. So if you have the clouds there, how do you figure that? The sun and the
Okay.
stars and the.
So
Yeah,
you'll measure it for on a night when you do have stars.
I'm just saying, it's like a little. Anyway, okay. I did. Okay, Yoma. Yoma. We have Zion Aleph. The Kohen Gadol came to read. If he wished to read wearing his linen vestments, he may read, and if not, he would read while wearing his own white robe. The attendant of the synagogue takes a Torah scroll and gives it to the head of the synagogue. The head of the synagogue gives it to the deputy Kohen Gadol, and the deputy gives it to the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol stands up, accepts the scroll, and reads while standing. He reads from Akre Mos in the portion that begins, but on the 10th. Then he rolls up the Torah scroll, puts it in his bosom, and says, "More than I have read to you is written here," and he recites by heart from the book of Numbers. Beginning on the 10th. Thus, then he recites over 8 benedictions for the Torah, for the sacrificial service, for the Thanksgiving offer, for the giving of sins, the temple separately, for Israel separately, for Yerushalayim separately, for the Kohanim separately, and for the rest of the prayer. One who sees the Kohen Gadol when he reads cannot see the ox and the he-goat as they are burned. And one who sees the ox and the he-goat as they are burned cannot see the Kohen Gadol when he reads because they may not, be, not because he may not, but because the distance between them was great, and both services performed at the same time. If he read the Torah in the linen vestments, he then washed his hands and feet, undressed, went down to the mikveh, and immersed himself. He came up and dried himself. They brought him the golden vestments. He dressed and washed his hands and feet, and then he went out and sacrificed his ram and the ram of the people, and the 7 unblemished male sheep in the first year. This is the opinion of Reb Eliezer. Rabbi Akiva says they were brought with the daily morning offering as well as the ox for a burnt offering, but the he-goat, which is done outside, were brought with the daily afternoon offering. Okay. So, okay.
Got him.
I guess the Kohen Gadol never has to wait online to get into the mikvah. Okay.
Yeah, he never gets to Strimal stage. You know what Strimal stage is?
No, what's it?
It's on the Erev Yom Kippur when you go to the mikveh in the late afternoon and you put a stick into the mikveh and you start stirring it and you come out with a Strimal.
Never heard that. Oh my gosh. All right. Base Gimel. If one collected coins and said, "Let these be for my half shekel," Beis Shammai says the remainder is placed in the collection chest marked the native offering. But Beis Hillel says the remainder is unconsecrated. If he said, "I will bring my half shekel from these funds," they concur that the remainder is unconsecrated. If he said these funds will go for the purchase of the sin offering, they concur with the remainder is placed in the collection chest marked the native offering. And he said, "I will bring an animal purchase from these funds for a sin offering," and they concur the remainder is unconsecrated. Reb Shimon says, what is the difference between half shekels and the sin offering? Half shekels set a limit, whereas the sin offering does not have a set limit. Reb Yehuda says even half shekels have no set limit, but when Israel returned from the Babylonian exile, darkens with their shekels and later sell with their shekels. Still later, Tavayim were the shekels, and they wish to contribute to dinners as their half shekels. Rabbi Shimon to Rabbi Yehuda. Nevertheless, they all gave a like amount. Where in the case of a sin offering, the person brings one worth a selah, another brings worth 2 selim, and yet another one worth 3 selim. The remainder of funds set aside for the half shekels of the consecrated. The remainder of funds set aside for the purchase of the tenth of an ephah meal offering. The remainder of the funds set aside for the purchase of bird offerings of zavos, and women after childbirth. The remainder of funds set aside for the purchase of sin offerings and guilt offerings. These remainders are to be placed in the collected chest marked the native offerings. This is the general rule. Whatever money has been set aside for the purchase of sacrifices to a soul for a sin or guilt, its remainder to be placed in the collection marked the native offering. The remainder of funds set aside for a burnt offering is to be used for the purchase of burnt offerings. The remainder of funds set aside for a meal offering is used for the purchase of a meal offering. And the remainder of funds set aside for a peace offering is to be used for the purchase of a peace offering. The remainder of funds set aside for a Pesach offering is to be used for the purchase of a peace offering. The remainder of funds contributed to the offerings of Nazarites is to be used for Nazarites, but the remainder of funds contributed for the offering of a specific Nazarite is to be placed in the collection box marked the native offering. The remainder of funds contributed for distribution to poor people is to be used for poor people, but the remainder of funds contributed for the sake of a specific poor man is to be given to that poor man. The remainder of funds contributed to the ransom of captives is to be used for the ransom of captives, but the remainder of funds contributed to the ransom of a specific captive is to be given to that captive. The remainder of funds contributed to the burial of the dead is to be used for the burial of the dead, but the remainder of funds contributed for the burial of a specific dead person is to be given to his heirs. The mayor says the remainder of funds contributed for the burial of a specific dead person to be held in escrow until Eliyahu comes. But Mussin says that the remainder of funds contributed for the burial of a specific dead person, they build a monument on his grave. Okay.
All right. Shabbos.
Ooh, Shabbos, okay. We have Yud Aleph, Yud Hey.
Vav.
One,
Uh, yeah, we're on Vav.
not Hey?
No,
Well,
Yud Vav.
okay. One who removes his fingernails one with the other or with his teeth, and similarly one who removes his hair, his mustache, and his beard in such a manner, or one who braids her hair or paints her eyes or parts of her hair, the Elliot declares liable. But the incumbent permit them as rabbinical enactments. One one who declares a plan from a perforated fire plot is liable, from an unperforated one is exempt. And Shimon, however, exempts in both cases. Hajj Malak. No, we're not finished though. Okay.
No, no, nowhere near.
Yeah, Hajj Malak. Okay. Okay, we have
Okay.
Yud Aleph, Yud Aleph, Aleph. One who throws from a private domain to a public domain or from a public to a private domain is liable. One who throws from a private domain to another private domain and a public domain lies in between. Rebbe Akiva, Rebbe Akiva holds him liable, and the sages, however, exempt him. In what manner? Two balconies, one opposite the other in a public domain. One who hands over or throws from one to the other is exempt. If both were in one row, one who hands over is liable, whereas one who throws is exempt. But such was the work of the Levites. There were two wagons, one behind the other in a public domain. They would hand over the boards from one to the other, but they would not throw them. The bank of a cistern and a rock that are 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim wide, one who takes an article from them or places an article upon them is liable. Less these dimensions, he is exempt.
Right.
Okay. And we are on to
Yep.
brothers. Base Gimel. If someone read the Shema but did not hear it, he fulfills his obligation. Yossi says he has not fulfilled his obligation. If one read the Shema without enunciating the letters properly, Rabbi Yossi says he has fulfilled his obligation. Rabbi Yehuda says he has not fulfilled his obligation. If one reads in reverse order, he has not fulfilled his obligation. If one read and erred, he must revert to the place where he erred. Skilled work would read while on top of a tree or a row of bricks, which they are not permitted to do in reciting the tefillah. A bridegroom was exempt from reciting the Shema from the first night until the first Saturday night. If he had not performed the deed, it happened in the case of Rabbi Gimel that he read the Shema on the first night following his wedding. His disciples said to him, "Have you not taught us, our master, that a bridegroom was exempt from reading Shema on the first night?" He said to them, "I shall not listen to you to absolve myself from the kingdom of heaven, even for a moment."
A lot of interesting stories with Rabban Gamliel, especially here in this parak. There are going to be a couple more tomorrow that we're going to go through again involving Tavi.
Right. Tavi's a big guy. Okay, we have Vav Hey. Hey. Regarding one who deposits money with a money changer, if the money is tied, the money changer may not use it. Therefore, if the money changer spends the money, he has omitted Me'ilah. If the money is loose, the money changer may use it. Therefore, if the money changer spends the money, he has not committed Me'ilah. If the money is deposited with a householder, whether tied or loose, he may not use it. Therefore, if he spends the money, he has committed Me'ilah. A storekeeper is likened to a householder, and these are the words of Rav Meir. Rav Yehuda says the storekeeper is likened to a money changer. Regarding a consecrated pruta that fell into a purse, or if the owner said a pruta in this purse shall be consecrated, yet as soon as he spends the first pruta, he has committed Me'ilah, and these are the words of Rabbi Akiva. But the comment saying he has not committed Me'ilah until he spends the entire purse. Rabbi Akiva agrees one who says a pruta of this purse shall be consecrated, that he may spend and continue to spend the money until he spends the entire purse.
Alhamdulillah, Me'ilah. You got
Lovely.
Tamidach?
Right here. Okay, here we go. Aleph, Aleph. The Kohanim would stand guard in three places: in the holy temple, in the chamber of Avitanas, in the chamber of the ray, and the hall of the fire. The chamber of Avitanas and the chamber of the ray were upper stories, and the youngsters would guard there. The hall of the fire was a dome, and if it was a large house encircled with ledges of stone, and the elders of the base would sleep there. The keys of the courtyard were in their hands, and the young Kohanim would sleep each with his pillow on the ground. If they would not sleep in their holy vestments, rather they would remove them and fold them and place them beneath their heads. And they would cover themselves with the personal garment. If one of the Kohanim experienced a premonition, he would exit the hall of fire and proceed through the tunnel that went under the mirror, and there were lamps burning there and there until he reached the immersion room. A large fire was there, as well as a latrine of dignity. This was its dignity. If one found it closed, he knew there was a person there. If he found it open, he knew there was no person there. He descended, immersed himself, ascended, and dried himself off, and warmed himself in front of a large fire. He came, sat next to his fellow Kohanim until the gates were open. He departed and went on his way. One who wishes to
That's
separate
it.
some
No, that's
ashes.
it. That's it. Just the one over there.
And we are on the yeah, and we have base tests. What is considered a lost article? If he finds a donkey or a cow grazing by the road, this is not considered a lost article. A donkey with its gear overturned or a cow running among the vineyard, that is considered a lost article. If he returned it and ran away, and returned it again and it ran away even 4 or 5 times, he is obligated to return it, as it is said, you shall surely return them. If he is refrained from earning a seller, he shall not say to him, give me a seller. Rather, he pays from his wage for the, like an idle worker. If there is a court, he may stipulate before the court. No court before whom shall he stipulate? His own takes the precedence. If he finds in a stable, he is not responsible for it. In a public domain, he's responsible for it. If in a graveyard, he may contaminate himself for it. If his father says to him, contaminate yourself, or he says to him, do not return it, he should not obey him. If he unloaded and loaded even 4 or 5 times, he's obligated, as it is said, you shall surely help. If he walked away and sat down and said, since the commandment is incumbent upon you, if you want to unload, unload, if he is exempt. And if he said with him, if he is old or sick, he is obligated. It is a commandment in the Torah to unload, but not to load. Rabbi Shimon says, even to load. Rabbi Yossi says, the Galilean says, if he bore more than his proper burden, he is not bound to him for his head under his burden, a burden which he can hear. Between his own lost article and his father's lost article, his own lost article takes precedence. Between his own lost article and his teacher's lost article, his own takes precedence. Between his father's lost article and his teacher's lost article, his teachers take precedence, for his father brought him into this world, whereas a teacher who taught him wisdom brings him into the life of the world to come. If his father is a scholar, however, his father takes precedence. If his father and a teacher were carrying a load, he should put down his teachers, and he has to put down his father's. If his father and his teacher were in captivity, he should ransom his teacher. Afterwards, he ransom his father. If his father was a scholar, however, he should ransom his father, and afterwards ransom his teacher. Okay.
That's it for
All right.
today.